In this podcast episode, Liz Truss, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, shares her insights on Britain's current socio-political and economic challenges. She discusses the reasons behind the country's decline, the ideological battles within its institutions, migration issues, economic stagnation, the influence of left-wing neo-Marxist ideas, and concerns over Islamism. Truss also sheds light on the infiltration of key British institutions by progressive ideologies and explores possible solutions to reverse the country's downward trajectory. Liz Truss reflects on the economic deterioration Britain is experiencing, comparing its GDP per capita to that of Mississippi, the poorest U.S. state, to emphasize the country's relative impoverishment. She points to the loss of entrepreneurial talent and millionaires leaving at a record pace, especially moving to places like the UAE and the U.S., driven by heavy taxation and overregulation. This exodus includes business founders and investors, which she warns will eventually affect other sectors, like corporate and public services, as economic pressure mounts. Towns historically built on manufacturing and industry, such as Paisley and Leeds, have become symbols of decline and lost purpose. Despite 14 years under conservative governments, she argues that the crucial economic and cultural problems have worsened, not improved. Truss identifies illegal migration as a significant ongoing issue in Britain, alongside mass migration and rising crime rates. She criticizes a system that prioritizes the rights of immigrants, including those involved in heinous crimes, over the interests and safety of British citizens. This imbalance, she asserts, stems from laws and bureaucratic systems that have been manipulated by ideological forces, undermining public confidence in the government's ability to protect its people and enforce immigration policies effectively. A core theme of the discussion is the takeover of British institutions by what Truss terms neo-Marxist or woke ideologies that reject traditional Western values, including Christianity, family structures, and national pride. She explains how this ideological shift was rooted in changes implemented during Tony Blair's government, notably through legislation like the Human Rights Act, the Equality Act, and the Climate Change Act. These acts embedded progressive values into the legal and institutional fabric of the country, promoting universal human rights, equality measures, and environmental policies that she sees as detrimental Trojan horses for a broader left-wing agenda. Truss argues that these laws serve to privilege globalist or universal concerns over the interests of British citizens, making it harder to reverse or challenge these policies. Truss highlights a weakening of democratic accountability in Britain, where power has increasingly shifted from elected officials to unelected bodies such as the judiciary, civil service, central banks, and independent agencies. This diffusion of authority has allowed leftist ideologies to become entrenched in state institutions, making it difficult for any prime minister or government to enact meaningful change. She points out the lack of a clear chain of command and the resistance of the bureaucracy to political leadership as major hurdles faced during her tenure. Truss likens this to a form of deep state that works in tandem with mainstream media to suppress dissenting voices and undermine reform efforts. Discussing her personal experience as Prime Minister, Truss recounts the intense opposition from the media and the bureaucratic establishment, which she describes as a coordinated effort to delegitimize her and prevent policy reforms. She defines the deep state as unelected bureaucrats with their own left-wing agenda who are deeply embedded within the media landscape. This alliance curtails media freedom and manipulates public narratives, reinforcing the challenges of fighting entrenched ideological power. Truss sheds light on the presence of ideological groups within Britain's civil service and public institutions, including transgender activists, environmental extremists, and supporters of Islamist factions. She views these groups as destructionists, undermining the traditional family unit, Christian values, and national identity from within. This infiltration not only promotes contentious social policies, but also influences government departments and enforcement agencies, creating internal conflicts and policy inconsistencies. Exploring the rise of identity politics and cultural shifts, Truss criticizes the left's transformation from electoral politics to tactics such as lawfare, cancel culture, limiting free speech, and institutional infiltration. She emphasizes the role of what she calls suicidal empathy, where activists genuinely believe in the righteousness of globalist, pro-environment, and human rights causes, but fail to see the damaging long-term impact on their own societies. Additionally, she discusses the creation of a lucrative gravy train for elites linked to climate change initiatives and NGOs, which she believes incentivizes the perpetuation of these policies. Truss discusses the paradox of conservative governments in power for more than a decade, while allowing the country's decline and ideological takeover to continue. She attributes this to political parties focused more on maintaining office than implementing disruptive change. She also explains why large swaths of the British public, especially outside the elite urban centers, feel disconnected and disempowered by politics. According to Truss, roughly 60 to 70% of Britons favor radical change, but struggle to translate this into political power because the elite, media, and bureaucracy are aligned against such changes. At the heart of the conflict, Truss frames Britain's current struggles as a fundamental battle between two worldviews. On one side are those who support the nation-state, Christian values, family, and free speech. And on the other are globalists seeking centralized control, dismantling traditional institutions, and promoting universalist ideologies often aligned with the World Economic Forum and global governance models. She identifies leaders like Donald Trump, Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad, and Japan's Fumio Kishida as counterforces to globalist agendas working to reclaim their nation's sovereignty. Among the many challenges, Truss singles out Islamism as her foremost worry. She criticizes appeasement policies toward Islamist groups within British institutions and warns about attempts to suppress open discussion on the topic through redefining terms like Islamophobia to anti-Muslim hatred. Citing police cover-ups and political representatives who advocate for practices like Sharia law and cousin marriage, she cautions that unchecked Islamist influence threatens the cultural and social fabric of Britain, making it more difficult to reverse compared to economic problems. Truss discusses the decline in Christian faith in Britain, noting that while Christianity was once a foundational backdrop, it has been challenged and displaced by progressive ideologies. She views the loss of faith as creating a vacuum that these ideologies have filled. While acknowledging a recent revival of interest in Christianity due to perceived threats, she stresses that the erosion of traditional religious values has weakened societal cohesion, leaving Western nations vulnerable to ideological fragmentation and moral decline. Addressing means to reverse Britain's decline, Truss emphasizes the need for a counter-revolution rather than mere conservatism. She advocates for purging ideological infiltration within the bureaucracy, reforming the media landscape, and supporting entrepreneurs and independent voices willing to challenge the status quo. Citing efforts by leaders like Argentina's Javier Milei, who axed government departments to reduce bureaucratic overreach, she argues that true change will be disruptive and chaotic, but necessary to restore national vitality and democratic control.